All right, well, welcome to the shop. And today, as you see in the title of the video, we're going to make something pretty dang special. All right, so I've been sitting on this one for a while. All right, I've wanted to try this technique before. Again, this is nothing new. People have been making wheels like this for a long time. And these wire wheels have typically been made out of like pieces of pipe. But in the past, the way that I've seen it is where people cut a piece of pipe and then put it on a lathe and sort of cut it or precisely drill it. It's a whole bunch of work. So what I'm offering now is a 3D printed set of parts that facilitates you being able to do this with very little complication. Now, the threading of the spokes seems really daunting at first because there's a lot of them, all right? It's like, the idea that a bigger airplane is really impressive just because it's bigger, when in reality, it's really not all that much impressive. It's just, it seems like it because it's big. It seems really impressive because it looks really complicated, but it's really not. It's quite simple. You just have to follow a pattern. So today I'm going to show you how to put everything together for this wheel design and add it to your airplane, and it's such a phenomenal thing. What I want to point out is, I'm going to insert some photos here, is that the weight of this wheel is significantly less than a stock or commercially available wheel. So I compared it to a wheel that is about the same size. It's a Williams Brothers plastic wheel that has foam rubber tire on it, and it's less than half the weight. Okay, so you are going to save a tremendous amount of weight by doing this. Now, obviously, this is something that I've not really done before. This is literally my first one. But again, I've seen it done several times, and I'm like, oh, well, I can do that, but I didn't have those tools. Well, I have a different tool. Last of all, I need to acknowledge that this is a remix of a 3D print. I am very privileged to know many people in this hobby, and one of them is Tim Wright. And Tim did the original vintage wheel that I based this off of. And I made sure it was okay with him that I'm making this video about this wheel. I want to make sure that he is acknowledged for his hard work in designing the original. And all I did was a little bit of a remix. I imported it into Fusion. Fusion did a lot of the calculations for me, and I was able to literally just cut a donut out of his design and add some holes. It's really all the work that I did. Now, there are some additional things that you'll see along the way that facilitate this, and I can take some credit on presenting it to you, but again, none of this is my idea. So with all of those things out of the way, let's get started in building your wheels. All right, so I've got you guys here on the workbench, so excuse the lav mic. It just helps with the sound to make sure you guys get the best sound. So I'm going to start with all of the different pieces, how to get things set up, and some of the additional hardware that you're going to need. First, we'll start with the pieces, and this is a 3D print of the tire piece. I've printed this in TPU, so it's squishy and twisty and bendy. I'm using the gyroid infill, and I use 10% infill with 2 walls. And I'm pretty satisfied with how squishy this is. It's not so squishy that it's going to collapse under load, and it's enough to like take some of the initial shock out of landing situations. So that's that detailed piece. You can probably also print this in PLA or ABS or something like that. I personally wouldn't recommend it because that's going to be pretty tough and pretty hard. And that's going to put a lot of the abuse on the actual spokes themselves. And to be clear, these spokes are actually thread. And we'll get there. We'll get there. Well, not thread, but we'll get there. Additional pieces are your 2 different rim halves. One half has all of the holes around the perimeter, and one has none around the perimeter. We have our center hub that you will also need. And we also have these spacer pieces. I printed these out of TPU. That's why they look a little bit different than the rim and the hub. Just because I already had the TPU on the printer already and didn't feel like changing the filament. Up to you, whatever you want to print it on. They're sized for a very specific purpose that we'll get into. Last, but certainly not least, is our jig. Our jig is a simple piece of print that I printed a 20% infill. It comes with holes marked, and then for the center hole, I definitely recommend that you do like a 4-wall print. So that when you drill out your center hole for your axle, you're able to drill it out specifically for the size of your axle that you intend on using. Now, to utilize the jig, you're going to be putting in pins. So obviously the axle, a portion of the axle goes in the center. And then I'm using simple yard flag marker that I clipped some pieces off of. And that's what goes in here. And these holes are sized at 2.5 millimeter to accommodate these yard flag. You may have to, depending on the settings of your printer, you may have to drill those out a tiny little bit. But there you go. And that's the basis of your jig configuration. The next thing you're going to want to do is use your spacers, and these simply go over top of the outside pins. And these are used really just to support your rim. Your rim, the first rim that you're going to grab is the one with the holes around the perimeter, because that's the one we're going to be creating with the spokes. And that simply goes right like that. So these are sized and positioned to keep the rim in a mostly center configuration around the center post, which you also slide on the hub. Simple as that. The last thing you're going to want to try to do is line up the hub, or the rim, so that none of the holes are being blocked by the pins. All right, from here, what we're going to do is we're going to set aside the other pieces, and we're going to get some tools that we're going to need, and that involves tweezers. All right, you're going to need tweezers because as we begin to get some of this in, it's just going to make your life easier. You can try using a hemostat, but I find that even that was a little bit cumbersome. I'm recommending that you use beading crimps, mostly because the beading crimps provide a nice secure connection for the end. And obviously you'll want something to crush those crimps with. The last thing, and probably the most important, is the line that you're going to be using. I'm using this fishing line from Walmart. I love this stuff because it's like a twisted braided line that doesn't really stretch that much, as opposed to some of the solid fishing lines that can stretch, especially when they get under higher loads. So this line, when it gets to be too high, it does stretch a little bit, but mostly it fails. Meaning that it just breaks. And this is 65-pound test. Now, 65 pounds times 24 on each side, there's a lot of pressure that this will be able to hold. So I'm not too terribly worried about this breaking as much as I am as the 3D print itself. So the first thing that we're going to want to do to start threading the spokes is to actually measure out the amount of line that we need. And the amount that we want to measure out is 3 yards. 3 yards. That's 9 feet. All right. So use a ruler, use a yardstick, whatever you need, and go ahead and measure that out. All right. So with the amount of line measured out, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our crimp and we're going to create a loop, fish the line through, and then through again on the same side. Okay, and then we're going to pull that tight, leaving about a centimeter or so at the end. Doesn't really matter. We're going to trim it off, and then we're just going to flatten our crimp. Just like that. Super, super easy. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go through our first hole. It doesn't matter which one And we're just mainly focusing on setting our crimp. All right. So our crimp, I'm starting with it facing me. You're going to turn this as you go. The general pattern that you're going to do is you're going to go around the top of the hub, and you're going to go through the next hole at 90 degrees, so a right angle. Let me go ahead and demonstrate this first pass for you, and then we'll get to the next one. All right, so we've threaded from our original hole around the top of the hub down to the hole that is 90 degrees from here. From here, we're going to go to the next hole over. And then we're going to go to the bottom of the hub. And again, to the next hole over. So as you can see, things are kind of a little bit of a mess. So it's important for us to try to keep things as organized as possible so that the finished product will look fantastic. So here's our basic pattern. This is what we're going to do. This is what I would call one repetition. And we're going to be doing this many more times all the way around. So from here, the next thing to do is to go over one more hole. And again, do the same thing. On the top, come through at 90 degrees, go over, go to the bottom, go 90 degrees, come through. So I'm going to time lapse this next part, and I'll try to go a little bit slow at first and then speed up the time lapse just to get to the end so I can show you how to terminate the line at the end. All right, so now we've come to a point where we can start getting a little bit confused as we go. All right, so it seems like, oh, well, we're half done. Well, no, not really. Really, what we're doing is we're alternating the pattern. So you're actually going to go through each hole twice. All right, and so this is the point at which we start to go through each hole twice as we go around the rim. So again, keeping track of where you're going, this is really the only part that can trip you up. So we went through this hole, but we already went up. So at this point, we know that here it's time to go down. All right, so at this point, now that we've got that out of the way, the pattern is still exactly the same, only we know that if we're coming out and this is a single thread coming out, we need to go up, and if it's a double thread, then we need to go down. I'll also mention while I'm here that if your aim is terrible like mine, and the very tip of your thread gets a little frayed, you can cut it off to get a fresh end for going through. This hole is pretty small. I wouldn't recommend trying to do a needle of any kind. But yeah, there is enough length in the 3 meters for you to do a couple of trimmings. The 3 meters is just nice because at the end, when we have to really pull on it to get tension, you're going to want some to like wrap around your fingers a little bit. So this is the point where everything becomes way confusing. All right, so you really have to start paying attention to where is double threaded and where is not. And also being able to pay attention to what's 90 degrees and what's not. So really what you're looking at here, where my eye is going is, I went through here, came 90 degrees, went over 1. So I need to go over 1. So my line coming up from the bottom needs to go in this hole. All right, so if you've made it this far, congratulations, you're almost done. You've only got 90 more degrees to go. Okay, whew, we made it. It was a little painful, but it's okay. We're to the end. Now, what I have found that helps is with a little bit of tension here, you can squeeze both ways to help take some of the slack. Generally, you want to try to keep this flat on the supports. And even if you want to make sure that it's pretty round, you can check with the tire and just push the tire on it to make it nice and round again. But for now, what we're going to do next is put our crimp on. So we are going to crimp the other end. It's a little bit more tricky than the other one, but we're going to use the exact same technique. So the first thing we're going to do is obviously thread it on. And because I have big fat fingers, I find it easier sometimes to use the tweezers. To create my loop. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get this loop all the way down to the end right by the hub. All right. And with the loop down there, you don't want to go all the way. So what I'm doing is I'm putting my tweezers inside the loop so that I can do some pulling and tightening and things like that. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to try to over tighten this a little bit. And then slip my tweezers out. So that holds the line pretty well, and then once we straighten things out, it's nice and tight. Then I can come back with my pliers, pull a little bit out of round again, and set the crimp. Again, at this point, because there's no glue or anything, it's just the length of the strings itself. Things are pretty loosey-goosey and pliable, and you can position things pretty well. At this point, yeah, I can even take the rim off with the hub, and things stay pretty well, only things spin around the center, all right? So these are all good things so that you can be able to position the lines, get things perfect, and make sure that you're ready for the next step. I'm going to go ahead and take my number 11 blade or any other sharp implement and go ahead and trim my lines. As you can see, there's a little bit of leftover. This is what you're looking at. All right, so with my lines trimmed, I'm going to go ahead and position my tire over top. Now, I did modify the STL file from the original to include a little bit of clearance on the inside of the tire to account for whatever securing mechanism, like I'm using these crimps. But it also leaves clearance for if you're using thicker string of some kind, it should allow for whatever you're using. All right, so at this point, I am going to position my tire to make sure that my rim is nice and round. And then I'm going to try to gently remove that. And now I'm going to try to keep these down flat, make sure everything is down flat on the jig. And in order to set everything, I am going to clean my tip off first. Yikes. So with the tip nice and clean, it's not going to catch on any of the strings. And we're going to just add a couple of drops to the hub to position things in place for now. I find that I'm able to blow some of this CA to help move it into the position that I want. Again, check to make sure everything is nice and flat, because that's going to determine whether or not you have wobble as the wheel rotates. All right, so I'm going to end up gluing the rest of these. I have found when I put the first one together, because of how the lines cross, you can actually get like a CA bubble on some of these small holes. It's pretty interesting. If you do get one of those, you can easily blot at it with a paper towel to soak up some of the excess CA. So at this point, we are able to handle the wheel carefully. We don't want to go crazy, but we can handle it carefully to pull it off the jig and glue the other side of the hub. So now what we can do, pull off our piece of axle. That ain't bad for a handmade wheel. Nice and round this way, very little wobble this way. So now what I generally do is I take each half. You think of the rim as two different halves. I will clean this up a little bit. You can see I've got a little bit of my tape from my print bed on here that I will clean up. And I'm going to paint this. So I'm going to spray on just a light misting of primer, and then I'll do some silver. And then I'm going to come back and sand this inner edge of both sides of the rim. You can sand a little bit in here, but I'm just going to shy away from that just because I don't want to sand on top of any of these lines. I don't think I want to include glue on any of these lines because as the wheel takes an impact, I want these lines to be able to move and shift a little bit to help absorb and transfer some of that energy around the wheel. Make sense? So with that, let me go paint these and we'll come back. All right, well, welcome back. As you can see, we've got some paint on the hub, or the hub and the rim and the spokes, so everything looks pretty well silvered. And we're back on the jig as well. Again, we have some ability for this to flex and have some play in it, and the jig helps us eliminate a lot of that. So as we glue this together, we're really just trying to work out tolerances here. Again, we've got these crimps that we're going to try to keep pushed out of the way as much as possible, keep the tire centered on the hub or the rim as much as possible. And then we will be putting the other rim on top. All right, so you're going to want to make sure that you've got your surfaces pretty well cleaned. And like I said, you can use sandpaper or even like the edge of a razor blade to scrape some of the paint off. But for the most part, you just need to be pretty well clean. And it's good enough. And so we're just going to get right into it. So the way that I start with this is, again, making sure that everything is pressed down nice and firmly. We can go ahead and check the centering again. But to be honest, once you push this down, it's going to kind of round things out on its own because of how the rim and the tire lock in together. So really what we're going to do is we're just going to take our jig with our rim assembly, and we're just going to put a thin bead of CA glue around the outside. Don't have to put a lot. This is going to stick pretty well to the tire. And again, checking the where the crimps are. I'm going to try to get things as center as possible. And in one pretty stiff motion, just push down and hold it there. So about 30 seconds is pretty much all you need for that step. And then we're going to go ahead and do a dry test fit of the other half of the rim. And just as expected, it slips down nicely. With this part, we're going to first put some CA on the rim inside. And then we'll do, again, that thin bead. Again, doesn't have to be a whole lot. And again, you want this to be kind of one swift motion, and then push it down so that the two halves of the rim meet together. At this point, you can try to continue to work that CA glue to squeeze portions of the rim together. But really all we're doing is reinforcing and strengthening things as they go around. It's not entirely critical that the two rim halves meet together. You can focus on that if you want to, but really we're just keeping this from collapsing in on itself as you do an impact. We can go back and check how nice and round our wheel rolls. And then when we put them together, they're both pretty good. Well, I am pretty pleased with that. I am super excited to share this with everyone, mostly because I enjoy sharing the hobby. I'm glad that I could take you on this journey and share this with you. Again, this is something that I've been wanting to try for a number of years now. I think it's pretty straightforward at this point, and I hope that this video will guide you through to do this yourself. Again, it's not terribly difficult, but if you follow it to the letter and be methodical and think through things before you do them, you'll have something that looks just as good, probably better than what I've put together for you today. I'm really excited that I can share these things with you, and your support by watching or hitting a thumbs up or whatever means a lot to me. And if you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments below or reach out to me directly or social media or wherever. I'm happy to answer questions and talk about this great hobby that we have together. Until next time, thanks again for stopping by, and continue to work on and making awesome your flying works of art.